September 11th, 2001, 8:46 a.m. Michael Hingson pressed his back against the cold concrete wall of Stairwell B North Tower World Trade Center. The acrid smoke burned his throat with each desperate breath. Around him, voices trembled with fear, some praying, others crying, many simply trying to comprehend the incomprehensible. His world had gone dark 41 years ago, but he had never felt more blind than in this moment. The familiar sounds of his office building had been replaced by chaos, the groaning of stressed steel, the distant rumble of destruction, the collective heartbeat of 3,000 souls fighting for survival. But there, pressed against his left leg, was warmth, steady breathing, a gentle pressure on his harness that said without words, "Trust me, I know the way." Roselle, his yellow Labrador guide dog, his partner, his friend. And on this morning that would forever change America, she would become his salvation. They had 78 floors to descend, 78 floors between life and death, between hope and despair, between a story that ends in tragedy, and one that reminds us why we never stop believing in miracles. This is that story. Before we journey together through one of the most remarkable survival stories of September 11th, I want to connect with you. Wherever you are in this world, whether you're listening in New York, London, Tokyo, or a small town I've never heard of, you're part of this story now. Please, take a moment to tell us where you're joining us from in the comments below. If stories of courage, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals move you the way they move me, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. We're building a community of people who believe that even in humanity's darkest hours, light finds a way to shine through. This is more than a survival story. It's a testament to trust, to the bonds that define us, and to the truth that sometimes our greatest heroes walk on four legs. Tuesday, September 11th, 2001, began like thousands of other Tuesdays in Michael Hingson's life. The pre-dawn darkness of his Westfield, New Jersey apartment held the familiar comfort of routine. At 41, Michael had learned to navigate the world through patterns, sounds, and the extraordinary partnership he shared with his guide dog. Roselle stretched in, her bed beside his, a contented yawn escaping as she sensed Michael stirring. She was a golden Labrador retriever, 2.5 years old, with eyes that seemed to hold wisdom beyond her years and a temperament so steady that even thunderstorms couldn't rattle her composure. "Morning, girl," Michael murmured, his hand finding her soft head in the darkness that was always his world. Roselle's tail thumped against the floor, not with excitement, but with the quiet acknowledgement of duty. She understood. Today was a work day. Michael had been blind since birth, a condition called retinal detachment that took his sight but never dimmed his determination. He had built a successful career in computer sales, working for Quantum ATL on the 78th floor of Tower 1, the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Most people saw his blindness first, but those who knew Michael saw something else entirely. A man who had never accepted limitations, who approached each day with the confidence of someone who had learned to see the world in ways others never could. As Michael showered and dressed, Roselle waited patiently, her internal clock as precise as any alarm. She knew the routine. Breakfast, the walk to the train station, the 45-minute ride into Manhattan, then the familiar journey through the vast lobby of the World Trade Center to the elevator bank that would carry them skyward to their office. The morning air carried the crispness of early September, that perfect temperature that makes you grateful for seasons. Michael felt it on his face as they walked to the Westfield train station, Roselle's pace steady and confident, her body language telegraphing the path ahead through the handle of her harness. On the train, Michael often thought about how fortunate he was. Not everyone understood what he meant by that. After all, what was fortunate about being born blind? But Michael had learned something that those with sight sometimes missed. When you can't see the surface of things, you develop an extraordinary ability to perceive their essence. He could hear the subtle changes in a person's voice that revealed their true feelings. He could sense tension in a room, or joy, or fear, through 1,000 tiny auditory cues that others filtered out. And he had Roselle, a partner whose dedication went beyond training, beyond duty, into the realm of pure love. As their train pulled into New York Penn Station, Michael felt the familiar thrill of arriving in Manhattan. The energy was palpable. Millions of people starting their day, each with their own dreams, challenges, and destinations. The city never slept, but mornings were when it truly came alive. Roselle guided him through the crowd with the grace of a dancer. She had learned to anticipate the flow of human traffic, to find the spaces between hurried commuters, to pause when necessary and move when the path cleared. Together, they were a single unit, moving through the urban landscape with a synchronization that spoke of thousands of hours of trust building. The subway ride to the World Trade Center was familiar, the rocking motion of the car almost meditative. Michael often used this time to prepare mentally for the day ahead. He had client calls to make, proposals to review, a team meeting at 10 o'clock. Normal things, important things, the things that make up a life. When they emerged from the subway, into the vast underground shopping concourse beneath the Twin Towers, Michael was struck, as he often was, by the sheer scale of the place. The acoustics told the story, sounds echoing off distant walls, the murmur of thousands of voices creating a low-frequency hum that spoke of enormous spaces filled with human activity. The World Trade Center wasn't just a place of business. It was a small city unto itself. Restaurants, shops, banks, businesses representing every corner of the global economy. People from every nation on Earth walked these halls, worked in these towers, built their dreams in these vertical neighborhoods that stretched toward the sky. As they approached the elevator bank, Michael felt the familiar sense of anticipation that came with the beginning of each workday. The ride to the 78th floor took just over a minute, but in that time, he always felt the weight of his ascension, not just physically, but metaphorically. Up here, he was part of something larger than himself, part of the great economic engine that made New York the capital of the world. The elevator doors opened with their familiar chime, and Michael and Roselle stepped into the hallway that led to Quantum ATL's offices. The carpet was thick beneath their feet, the walls lined with the kind of corporate art that was meant to inspire confidence and success. Michael couldn't see the paintings, but he could sense the space. Wide hallways, high ceilings, the quiet hum of productivity that comes from a well-organized business. "Morning, Michael," called Janet, the receptionist, her voice carrying the warmth of genuine friendship. "And good morning to you too, Roselle." Roselle's tail wagged briefly. She knew Janet always had a treat hidden in her desk drawer, though. She was too well trained to break protocol by asking for it during work hours. Michael's office was a corner space with windows facing north and east. He couldn't see the view, but he knew it was spectacular. The Hudson River, the George Washington Bridge in the distance, the green spaces of New Jersey spreading out like a carpet beyond the urban landscape. His colleagues often described it to him, and he had built a mental map of the vista that was as detailed as any photograph. As he settled into his desk chair, Roselle found her spot beside him, close enough to respond instantly if needed, far enough away not to interfere with his work. She rested her chin on her paws and settled in for what she expected would be a normal day at the office. The time was 8:30 a.m. In 16 minutes, their world would change forever. Michael was reviewing a client proposal when he heard David Frank's voice in the hallway. David was a colleague and friend, someone Michael had worked with for several years. But there was something different in David's tone this morning, an excitement, almost childlike in its enthusiasm. "Michael, you've got to come see this," David called out. "There's a small plane that hit the other tower." Michael looked up from his computer, confusion furrowing his brow. A small plane? How does a small plane hit the World Trade Center on a clear day? The towers weren't exactly hidden. They were the tallest buildings in Lower Manhattan, visible for miles in every direction. Roselle sensed the shift in the office atmosphere before Michael did. Her head lifted from her paws, ears alert, reading the subtle changes in human behavior that preceded something significant. The conversations around them had taken on a different quality. Voices were higher, movements more rapid, an underlying current of concern threading through the normal workday chatter. Michael stood and walked toward David's office, Roselle automatically falling into step beside him. Through the windows of the office, he knew his colleagues were getting their first glimpse of something that would soon dominate every television screen, every newspaper front page, every conversation for months to come. But Michael experienced it differently. He heard it first, a sound that didn't belong in their carefully ordered world. It started as a distant rumble, almost like thunder, but wrong somehow. Thunder had a rolling quality, building and fading. This was different. This was focused, direct, and it was getting louder. "What the hell?" someone said from across the office. The sound exploded into their reality at exactly 8:46 a.m. The building didn't just shake, it convulsed. Michael felt it through the soles of his feet first, a vibration that traveled up through the steel and concrete structure like a wave. Then came the impact itself, a sound so massive, so impossibly loud, that it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Roselle was on her feet instantly, her body pressed against Michael's leg. Her training had prepared her for many things: navigating crowds, avoiding obstacles, responding to commands under pressure. But nothing had prepared her for this. Every instinct told her to run, to flee, to escape whatever had just announced itself with such terrible violence. But her training was stronger than instinct. Her bond with Michael was stronger than fear. The lights flickered. Emergency alarms began to sound. Not the familiar, almost routine fire alarms they occasionally heard during drills, but something else entirely. These were alarms that spoke of genuine emergency, of systems failing, of a building under assault. Jesus Christ, David's voice cut through the cacophony. That wasn't a small plane. That was a huge jet. It hit us. It hit our building. The words took a moment to penetrate Michael's consciousness. Our building. Not the South Tower they had been watching. Their building, Tower 1, the North Tower. The building they were in, 78 floors above the street. Around them, the office erupted into controlled chaos. Phones started ringing as people tried to call loved ones. Voices. Rose's colleagues tried to piece together what had happened. The smell of smoke began to seep through the ventilation system. At first, just a hint, then growing stronger with each passing minute. Michael felt the familiar sensation of sensory overload that sometimes came when too much was happening too quickly. But Roselle's presence anchored him. Her breathing was steady, her body warm against his leg. She was afraid. He could sense that, but she was in control. If Roselle could be calm, he could be calm. "We need to get out of here," someone said. It might have been David, or Janet, or any of the dozen colleagues who were now moving with increasing urgency around the office. Michael knew they were right. Whatever had happened, whatever was happening, staying on the 78th floor of a damaged building was not an option. But as he turned toward the elevator bank, he heard something that stopped him cold. "The elevators aren't working," a voice called out. "None of them. We have to take the stairs." The stairs. 78 floors down. For a man who couldn't see where he was going, guided only by a dog who had never faced anything like this before. Roselle looked up at him, her eyes, which he couldn't see but somehow always felt, holding a steady confidence. She had been trained for this moment, not this exact scenario, but for the fundamental challenge it represented, getting Michael safely from point A to point B, no matter what obstacles lay between. The smoke was getting thicker now, seeping under doors and through air vents. People were coughing, covering their faces with whatever fabric they could find. The orderly evacuation procedures they had all learned during safety training seemed inadequate in the face of this reality. Michael reached down and found Roselle's harness, his fingers closing around the familiar leather handle that connected them. "Okay, girl," he said quietly, his voice steadier than he felt. "Let's go home." The door to stairwell B opened with the heavy mechanical sound of institutional architecture. Beyond it lay something Michael had traveled past thousands of times but never experienced. The emergency stairwell that would now become their lifeline. The first thing that struck him was the acoustics. The stairwell was a vertical tunnel, concrete, and steel, creating an echo chamber that amplified every sound. Footsteps became percussion, voices became chorus. The sounds of 3,000 people beginning their descent towards safety created a symphony of survival that was both terrifying and oddly comforting. They were not alone. Roselle paused at the threshold, her nose working to process the flood of new smells: concrete dust, smoke, the metallic tang of fear-driven adrenaline, and underneath it all, something else. Something chemical and wrong that spoke of systems failing, of materials burning that were never meant to burn. Michael felt the first step with his foot. The stairs were wider than normal residential steps, designed for the volume of people who might need to use them in an emergency exactly like this one. The handrail was smooth and cool under his hand, anchoring him to something solid in a world that had suddenly become unpredictable. "Take your time," he said to Roselle, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. "Nice and easy." Roselle began her descent with the methodical precision that had been drilled into her during 2 years of intensive training. Each step was deliberate, calculated. She could sense the people around them, some moving quickly, driven by panic, others moving slowly, hampered by age or injury or simple disbelief. Her job was to navigate through all of it, to find the safe path that would take Michael down 78 floors without incident. The crowd in the stairwell was unlike anything either of them had ever experienced. Office workers in business suits walked alongside maintenance staff in work clothes. Young interns helped elderly executives. Strangers became partners, sharing water, offering encouragement, creating an impromptu community born of shared crisis. Michael began to hear individual voices emerging from the collective murmur, a woman crying softly as she spoke into her cell phone. "I'm okay, Mom. I'm okay. I'm getting out. I'll call you when I reach the street." A man's voice, probably middle-aged, speaking with forced calm. "Stay together, everyone. We're going to be fine. Just take it one step at a time." A younger voice, maybe someone just out of college. "I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe this is really happening." Each voice told a story. Each person in that stairwell was someone's child, parent, spouse, friend. Each had gotten up that morning expecting an ordinary day and was now faced with the most extraordinary challenge of their lives. Roselle maintained her steady pace, her body language constantly communicating with Michael through the harness. A slight pause meant obstacle ahead. A gentle pull to the left meant adjusting course to avoid someone. A moment of stillness meant waiting for the flow of traffic to allow safe passage. Around the 70th floor, they encountered their first significant delay. Someone ahead had fallen, an older man, Michael gathered from the voices, and people were helping him to his feet, checking for injuries, deciding whether he could continue on his own or needed assistance. The delay gave Michael a chance to process what was happening. They had been in the stairwell for nearly 15 minutes now, and they had only descended 8 floors. At this rate, it would take them over 2 hours to reach the ground. Would the building hold that long? Would the air remain breathable? Would the stairwell itself remain intact? These were questions without answers, so Michael focused on what he could control: his breathing, his pace, his trust in Roselle. She had never let him down. In 2.5 years together, she had guided him safely through crowded airports, busy streets, unfamiliar buildings, construction zones. If anyone could get him out of this stairwell alive, it was the calm, competent animal whose breathing he could hear over the din of evacuation. "Good girl," he whispered, his hand briefly touching her head. Good girl." As they resumed their descent, Michael became aware of something remarkable happening around them. The initial panic was giving way to something else. Not calm, exactly, but a kind of collective determination. People were helping each other. Conversations were starting up between strangers. Someone was sharing water. Someone else was helping carry a briefcase for a person who was struggling. This was humanity at its best, Michael realized. Faced with unthinkable circumstances, people were choosing to be their best selves. They were choosing to care for each other, to share resources, to offer encouragement to strangers who had suddenly become comrades in survival. Around the 65th floor, they met a group of firefighters heading up. The sound of their heavy boots and equipment was unmistakable, even in the chaos of the stairwell. They were moving against the flow of evacuation, toward whatever hell awaited them in the upper floors of the tower. "How you doing, buddy?" one of them called out to Michael as they passed. "You okay?" "We're fine," Michael replied. Thank you. Thank you for what you're doing." The firefighter's voice was young, probably no older than 25. "Just doing our job. You keep moving down, okay? Don't stop. Don't go back for anything." As the firefighters continued their climb upward, Michael felt a profound mixture of admiration and heartbreak. He knew, they all knew, that these men were walking toward almost certain death. They knew it too, and they were doing it anyway, because that's what firefighters do. That's who they were. The descent continued. 60th floor, 55th floor, 50th floor. Each landing marked a small victory, a step closer to safety. But the air was getting thicker now, harder to breathe. The smoke was no longer just a hint. It was becoming a presence, stinging eyes and burning throats. Roselle's breathing was becoming more labored, but she never faltered. Her training had taught her to work through discomfort, to focus on the task at hand regardless of external conditions. Michael could feel her determination through the harness, could sense her absolute commitment to getting him safely to the ground. Around the 40th floor, they encountered another delay. This time it was more serious. Someone was having trouble breathing, possibly a heart attack brought on by the stress and exertion. Voices called out for help, for someone with medical training. The crowd pressed against the walls to make room for whoever was being treated. In the pause, Michael became acutely aware of his own physical state. His legs were beginning to ache from the constant downward stepping. His mouth was dry from the smoky air. His business clothes were soaked with sweat. But these discomforts seemed trivial compared to what others around him were enduring. He thought about his wife, Karen, probably at work by now, unaware of what was happening in Manhattan. He thought about his colleagues who had taken different stairwells, wondering if they were making similar progress toward safety. He thought about the firefighters who had passed them going up and said a silent prayer for their safety. But mostly, he focused on Roselle, her steady presence beside him, her calm professionalism in the face of unprecedented challenge, her unwavering commitment to their partnership. She had become more than a guide dog in these stairs. She had become a lifeline, a connection to hope, a reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, loyalty and love endure. The crowd began moving again, and they resumed their descent. 35th floor, 30th floor. They were getting closer now, but the journey was far from over. By the time they reached the 30th floor, Michael realized that this descent had become more than an evacuation. It had become a test of everything he had learned about courage, endurance, and trust over 41 years of life. His legs were cramping now, the repetitive motion of downward stepping taking its toll on muscles that weren't accustomed to such sustained exertion. Around him, he could hear others struggling with the same physical challenges. Older evacuees were breathing heavily. Younger ones were offering to carry bags, briefcases, anything that might lighten someone else's load. But it was the mental challenge that surprised him most. For a man who had spent his entire life navigating without sight, this stairwell presented unique difficulties. The acoustics were disorienting. Sounds bounced off concrete walls in unpredictable ways, making it hard to judge distances and directions. The crowd created a constant flow of obstacles that changed from moment to moment. And the smoke was beginning to affect his other senses, dulling the acute hearing and smell that he relied on to understand his environment. Roselle, however, seemed to be hitting her stride. The initial uncertainty he had sensed in her had been replaced by a focused determination that reminded him why guide dogs are considered among the most highly trained working animals in the world. Her pace remained steady, her navigation precise. When people moved erratically around them, she adjusted smoothly. When obstacles appeared, she found alternatives. When the crowd slowed, she waited patiently. When it moved, she moved with it. Around the 25th floor, they encountered a woman who was crying, not from panic, but from exhaustion and despair. She was probably in her 60s, Michael guessed from her voice, and the descent was taking everything she had. "I can't do this," she sobbed. "I can't make it, my legs, I just can't." Without hesitation, a younger man's voice responded, "Yes, you can. We're going to help you. What's your name?" "Margaret," she whispered. "Margaret, I'm Tom. This is my friend Sarah. We're going to walk with you, okay? One step at a time. We're not leaving you behind." Michael felt a surge of emotion as he listened to this exchange. Here, in the middle of the greatest urban disaster in American history, strangers were becoming family. People were discovering reserves of compassion and strength they never knew they possessed. The conversation reminded him of something profound. None of them were really alone in this stairwell. They were all connected by the simple fact of shared human experience, shared vulnerability, shared determination to survive and help others survive. As they continued past the 20th floor, Michael began to allow himself to believe they might actually make it. 20 floors was still a significant distance, but it was manageable. It was within the realm of possibility. He could feel Roselle's confidence growing too. Her pace had become more assured, her navigation more fluid. But just as hope was beginning to outweigh fear, the building shuddered again. This time, it was different from the initial impact. This was a deep, prolonged shaking that seemed to come from the very foundation of the structure. Around them, conversations stopped. Footsteps paused. For a moment that lasted an eternity, 3,000 people held their collective breath and wondered if the building would hold. "What was that?" someone whispered. "I don't know," came the reply. "Just keep moving. Keep moving." Later, Michael would learn that the second shaking had been the collapse of the South Tower, the other tower, Tower 2, where thousands of other people had been fighting the same battle for survival. But in the stairwell of the North Tower, they only knew that something terrible had happened, and that their own building felt less stable than it had moments before. The pace of evacuation picked up noticeably after that. The leisurely walking speed of the early floors gave way to something more urgent. People were still helping each other, still maintaining the remarkable civility that had characterized their descent, but there was a new awareness that time might be running out. Roselle sensed the change immediately. Her body language telegraphed increased alertness, though she maintained her disciplined pace. Michael could feel her muscles coiled with readiness, prepared to react instantly to any change in their circumstances. 5th floor. 10th floor. They were so close now that Michael could almost taste freedom. The air was getting cleaner, not clean, but cleaner than it had been in the upper floors. The smoke that had been their constant companion was beginning to thin, but the stairwell was also getting more crowded. As floors emptied their contents into the evacuation route, the flow of people became denser, more complex to navigate. Roselle's skills were being tested in ways that no training scenario had ever envisioned. Around the 8th floor, they encountered another group of emergency responders. Not firefighters this time, but paramedics and police officers who were trying to establish some order in the lower floors, to ensure that the evacuation proceeded as smoothly as possible. "How are you holding up, sir?" an officer called out to Michael. "We're doing fine," Michael replied, though his voice betrayed some of the strain he was feeling. "Your dog is incredible," the officer said. "I've been watching her work. She's getting you through this crowd like she's done it 1,000 times before." Michael felt a surge of pride in Roselle, mixed with gratitude for the officer's recognition of her skill. "She's the best partner I could ask for," he said. 5th floor, 4th floor, 3rd floor. The numbers were counting down toward salvation. Michael could hear different sounds now, not just the echoes of the stairwell, but hints of the outside world. Traffic, sirens, the sounds of a city responding to crisis. And floor. 1st floor. And then finally, the most beautiful sound Michael had ever heard. The creak of a heavy door opening, and beyond it, the ambient noise of the street. They had made it. The transition from the enclosed world of the stairwell to the open air of the street was jarring in ways Michael hadn't expected. After nearly an hour and a half in the echo chamber of concrete and steel, the sudden expansion of acoustic space was almost overwhelming. But it was the smell that hit him first. Not the clean September air he had breathed that morning, but something acrid and wrong. Burning jet fuel, pulverized concrete, the metallic tang of destruction on a scale that the human nose wasn't designed to process. Roselle paused just outside the building, her body tense with new alertness. The training that had prepared her to navigate city streets hadn't included anything like this. The familiar urban soundscape of traffic and pedestrians had been replaced by something chaotic and dangerous, sirens screaming from every direction, people shouting orders and information, the ominous rumble of a damaged building still groaning overhead. "Keep moving!" voices called out. "Don't stop! Get away from the building!" Emergency workers were directing the stream of evacuees away from the base of the tower, creating a clear zone around the building's perimeter. Michael felt hands guiding him, voices offering assistance, but through it all, Roselle remained his primary connection to safety. Her harness handle was solid and familiar in his grip, a touchstone of normalcy in an utterly abnormal situation. As they moved away from the building, Michael began to piece together the scale of what had happened. Through the conversations swirling around them, both towers were hit. Planes, commercial jets. Pentagon too, they're saying. The whole South Tower came down. Terrorist attack. The fragments of information painted a picture that was almost too large to comprehend. This wasn't just a building fire or an industrial accident. This was an attack on America itself, and they had been at ground zero of the most devastating act of terrorism in the nation's history. But in that moment, Michael's world was still small, still focused on the immediate. Moving away from danger, finding safety, making sure Roselle was okay. The larger implications would come later. Right now, survival was still the only priority that mattered. They were perhaps 2 blocks from the tower when Michael heard a sound that would haunt his dreams for years to come. It started as a rumble, low and ominous, like distant thunder. But it grew quickly, becoming a roar that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The North Tower, their tower, the building they had just escaped, was collapsing. "Run!" someone screamed. "Run!" The sound was indescribable, 1,000,000 tons of steel and concrete and glass giving way to gravity, creating a mechanical avalanche that sent shockwaves through the ground and filled the air with a cloud of debris. That turned day into night. Michael felt Roselle's body surge forward, her training overridden by pure instinct. They ran together, Michael's hand locked onto her harness, trusting her to find them a path through the chaos. Around them, hundreds of other people were running too, all fleeing the expanding cloud of destruction that was racing through the streets of Lower Manhattan like a living thing. The air became unbreathable. Dust filled their lungs, their eyes, their clothes. Michael felt debris hitting his back and shoulders. Small pieces at first, then larger chunks that spoke of a city literally falling apart around them. They ducked into the doorway of a building. Michael never learned which one, pressing themselves against the glass as the cloud of destruction rolled past them. For long minutes, they waited in a world that had gone completely dark, breathing through whatever fabric they could find, hoping that the structural integrity of their temporary shelter would hold. Gradually, the roar faded to a rumble, then to silence. The dust began to settle, though the air remained thick and acrid. Emergency sirens continued their electronic wail, but the sound of collapsing buildings, the sound that had defined the last several minutes of their lives, was gone. Michael and Roselle emerged from their shelter into a world that looked like the aftermath of a volcanic eruption. Everything was covered in a fine gray dust that turned cars, buildings, and people into ghostly monochrome figures. The familiar landmarks of Lower Manhattan were gone, replaced by a landscape of destruction that belonged in a war zone, not in the heart of American commerce, but they were alive. Against odds that seemed impossible, they had walked down 78 floors, navigated through crowds of panicked people, survived the collapse of one of the tallest buildings in the world, and emerged with nothing more than dust in their lungs and the knowledge that they had witnessed history in its darkest hour. Roselle shook herself, sending up a small cloud of concrete dust, then looked up at Michael with eyes that seemed to ask, "What now?" What now, indeed. In the hours that followed their escape from the North Tower, Michael and Roselle found themselves part of a massive human migration away from Ground Zero. Lower Manhattan had been transformed into a disaster zone, with emergency vehicles and personnel flooding in while civilians were evacuated out. They walked north through streets that seemed familiar and alien at the same time. The same storefronts and street signs were there, but everything was covered in that fine gray dust that had become the signature of September 11th. People moved like ghosts through this transformed landscape, many in shock, all trying to process what they had witnessed and survived. Michael's thoughts kept returning to the stairwell. Not the fear or the physical challenge, but the remarkable humanity he had witnessed. In those concrete stairs, surrounded by smoke and uncertainty, he had seen people at their absolute best. Strangers helping strangers, young people assisting the elderly, strong individuals supporting those who were struggling. It had been a masterclass in human decency under the most extreme circumstances. Roselle's performance had been nothing short of extraordinary. For a dog who had been trained in controlled environments, who had learned her skills through repetition and positive reinforcement, she had adapted to an unprecedented situation with remarkable composure. Every decision she had made in that stairwell had been correct. Every judgment call had prioritized Michael's safety. Every moment of their descent had demonstrated the profound bond between human and animal that makes the guide-dog partnership one of the most successful collaborations in history. As they walked through the dust-covered streets, Michael reflected on the randomness of survival. Thousands of people had been in those towers that morning. Many had escaped, but many had not. The difference between life and death had often come down to timing, location, physical capability, and yes, luck. He and Roselle had been fortunate, in ways that seemed almost miraculous. They had started their descent early, before the stairwells became completely clogged. They had been in good physical condition. They had encountered helpful people along the way. They had maintained their composure when panic might have led to fatal mistakes. And they had each other, the kind of partnership that multiplies individual strengths and compensates for individual weaknesses. But Michael also knew that their survival wasn't just about luck. It was about preparation, training, and the kind of trust that can only be built over years of shared experience. Roselle hadn't become a hero that day. She had revealed the heroism that had always been within her. As they continued their journey away from Ground Zero, Michael began to encounter other survivors from their building. Voices he recognized from the office, people he had worked with for years, all of them changed by what they had experienced. There were tears, embraces, expressions of gratitude that they had all made it out alive. But there were also absences, colleagues who had taken different stairwells, who had stayed behind to help others, who had made different choices that led to different outcomes. The full scope of the loss wouldn't be known for days, but already it was clear that September 11th had extracted a terrible price from the community of people who had worked in those towers. The phone call Michael made to his wife Karen from a stranger's cell phone was one of the most important conversations of his life. Her voice, tight with worry and relief, connected him to the world beyond the disaster zone, to the life that was waiting for him once he could get home. "I'm okay," he told her. "We're both okay. Roselle got us out." Karen had been watching the coverage on television, seeing the towers fall, knowing that her husband was somewhere in that chaos. The hours between the first impact and Michael's call had been the longest of her life. Getting home to New Jersey proved to be its own challenge. All bridges and tunnels into Manhattan were closed. Public transportation had shut down. The city had essentially been sealed off as emergency responders worked to secure the area and search for survivors. But in the spirit of cooperation that had defined so much of that day, strangers became allies. A businessman with a car offered rides to anyone trying to get to New Jersey. A ferry captain volunteered his boat to transport people across the Hudson River. Community after community opened their doors to help those who were trying to reunite with their families. The journey that normally took 45 minutes stretched into several hours, but Michael and Roselle eventually made it home. Walking through their front door, into the familiar space where this terrible day had begun, felt like emerging from a nightmare into reality. But the reality, Michael realized, had changed permanently. The world they had left that morning, a world where commercial airliners were just transportation, where skyscrapers were symbols of achievement rather than targets, where the phrase terrorist attack belonged to other countries and other times. That world no longer existed. In the days and weeks that followed September 11th, Michael and Roselle's story began to take on a life of its own. News outlets picked up the account of the blind man and his guide dog who had navigated 78 floors to safety. Their story became one of the positive narratives that emerged from a day dominated by loss and tragedy. But for Michael, the attention was both welcome and uncomfortable. He appreciated that their story gave people hope, that it demonstrated the power of the human-animal bond, that it showed how preparation and training could make the difference between life and death in extreme circumstances. At the same time, he was acutely aware that they were survivors of something that had killed nearly 3,000 people. Their story was inspiring precisely because so many other stories had ended differently. Roselle, for her part, seemed largely unaffected by her newfound fame. She continued to guide Michael with the same competence and dedication she had always shown. The traumatic experience in the tower didn't appear to have damaged her confidence or her ability to work. If anything, it seemed to have deepened the bond between them, creating a shared experience that would connect them for the rest of their lives together. Michael began speaking publicly about their experience, partly to honor the memory of those who didn't make it out, partly to educate people about the capabilities of guide dogs and the independence they make possible for people with disabilities. Each time he told the story, he was careful to emphasize that their survival had been a team effort, not just between him and Roselle, but involving all the people in that stairwell who had helped each other, supported each other, and maintained their humanity in the face of unthinkable circumstances. The story resonated because it contained so many elements that people needed to hear in the aftermath of September 11th. It was about courage in the face of terror. It was about the power of preparation and training. It was about loyalty and partnership. It was about ordinary individuals rising to meet extraordinary challenges. But perhaps most importantly, it was about hope. In a time when it would have been easy to despair about human nature, Michael and Roselle's story reminded people that good things were still possible, that bonds of trust and love could survive even the most devastating circumstances, that heroes sometimes walked on four legs and guided their partners toward the light. As months passed and the immediate shock of September 11th began to give way to longer-term processing and healing, Michael found himself reflecting on the lessons embedded in their experience. Some were practical: the importance of emergency preparedness, the value of remaining calm under pressure, the need for buildings to have adequate evacuation procedures for people with disabilities. But the deeper lessons were more personal and universal. Michael had learned something profound about the nature of courage during their descent from the 78th floor. Courage, he realized, wasn't the absence of fear. It was the decision to keep moving forward despite fear. Everyone in that stairwell had been afraid. The difference between those who survived and those who didn't often came down to their ability to channel that fear into productive action. He had also learned about the incredible capacity humans have for helping each other in crisis situations. The stairwell had been a laboratory of human behavior under extreme stress, and what he had observed there had restored his faith in people's fundamental decency. When everything familiar had been stripped away, when normal social structures had collapsed, people had chosen to be kind, generous, and supportive of strangers. Roselle had taught him lessons too, though she had delivered them without words. Her calm in the face of chaos had shown him the power of training and preparation. Her unwavering focus on their shared goal had demonstrated the importance of clarity of purpose. Her loyalty had reminded him that the most important relationships in life are built on mutual trust and respect. Most importantly, their experience had taught him that survival, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual, is rarely a solo endeavor. It requires partnership, community, and the willingness to both give and receive help. The man who had descended those stairs, guided by his dog, had been supported by dozens of other people along the way. Their survival story was really a community story, a testament to what becomes possible when people work together toward a common goal. Michael Hingson continued working in the technology field after September 11th, but he also became a sought-after speaker, sharing the lessons of that day with audiences around the world. His message was always the same: we are capable of more than we know. We are stronger together than apart, and the bonds that connect us, whether to other humans or to the animals who share our lives, are more powerful than the forces that seek to divide us. Roselle lived for several more years after September 11th, continuing to guide Michael with the same dedication and skill she had shown in the World Trade Center. When she finally retired from active duty, she was replaced by other guide dogs, but her legacy lived on in the story of what she and Michael had accomplished together. The guide dog training programs that had prepared Roselle for her work received increased attention and support after September 11th. People who had never thought about the challenges faced by individuals with disabilities began to understand the incredible sophistication of the partnerships between guide dogs and their handlers. Roselle had become an ambassador, not just for her own capabilities, but for the potential that exists when humans and animals work together with mutual trust and respect. Their story has been told in books, documentaries, and countless speeches. It has inspired other people with disabilities to pursue greater independence. It has educated the public about the remarkable abilities of working dogs. It has reminded everyone who hears it that heroism often comes in unexpected forms, and that the most ordinary partnerships can accomplish extraordinary things. But perhaps the most important legacy of Michael and Roselle's story is its reminder that even in humanity's darkest hours, light finds a way to shine through. In a stairwell filled with smoke and fear, surrounded by the worst that humans can do to each other, they had experienced the best that humans can be. That balance, the capacity for both tremendous evil and tremendous good, is part of what makes us human. Their story endures because it speaks to something fundamental about the human experience, our need for connection, our capacity for courage, our ability to find hope, even in hopeless circumstances. It reminds us that we are not alone in our struggles, that help often comes from unexpected sources, and that the partnerships we build, with other humans, with animals, with our communities, are what make survival not just possible, but meaningful. On the morning of September 11th, 2001, Michael, Hingson and Roselle began their day as they had hundreds of times before, as partners, each contributing their strengths to their shared navigation of the world. By the end of that day, they had become something more. Symbols of the power of trust, preparation, and unwavering loyalty in the face of unimaginable adversity. Their journey down 78 floors of a collapsing skyscraper was more than an escape. It was a demonstration of everything that makes the human-animal bond extraordinary. It showed that true partnership transcends species, that courage can be found in the most unlikely circumstances, and that sometimes our greatest teachers walk beside us on four legs. Today, when we face our own challenges, whether personal or collective, whether small or overwhelming, we can remember Michael and Roselle's story. We can remember that we are stronger than we know, that help often comes from unexpected sources, and that the partnerships we build with trust and respect can carry us through even the darkest times. Their story is ultimately about more than survival. It's about the triumph of hope over despair, of connection over isolation, of love over fear. It's a reminder that even when our world seems to be collapsing around us, we have the capacity to help each other, to support each other, and to find our way toward the light. In a world that often seems divided by differences, Michael and Roselle's partnership reminds us of what becomes possible when we focus on what unites us: our shared vulnerability, our mutual need for support, and our common hope for a better tomorrow. Their journey continues to inspire because it proves that heroes don't always wear capes or carry weapons. Sometimes they carry harnesses and guide sticks. Sometimes they have four legs and wet noses. Sometimes they are simply ordinary partners doing extraordinary things, because that's what partners do. They help each other home. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of the most remarkable partnerships in modern history. If Michael and Roselle's story has moved you, please share it with others. Like this video, subscribe to our channel, and let us know in the comments where you're listening from around the world. Because no matter where we are, no matter what challenges we face, we all need reminders that courage is possible, that loyalty endures, and that sometimes the partnership that saves us has been walking beside us all along. Remember, we are stronger together than apart. We are more capable than we know, and hope, like love, always finds a way.